Hey, good morning to those of you out there on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast with me. I'm excited for today's training. It's a beautiful day out there. And so that always makes it a lot more easy for me to bring the energy into here. I also appreciate seeing everybody engaging in chat. This is your community, so make sure you're engaging in chat. It's a great way to meet people. That's one of my favorite things to do with these trainings is give you an opportunity to network with each other. Before we get started, I just like to start today's training off with a tip. I like to start it off with a tip that we snip off in the replays or whatever, but as a way to say thank you for those showing up early and on time. And my tip for today, piggybacking on yesterday, it's for a customer and a friend of mine, Kami, but he asked me this question about when do you go between James and Jim? So if somebody is called James, when do you put Dear James or Dear Jim or Hi James, Hi Jim? And I'm going to answer that in a second, but I would say first off, it's Jim's responsibility or James. This is a really important thing. If you go by Jim, but your name is James, don't put James into LinkedIn as James Smith, right? That makes us feel awkward when we sit there and reply to you and then you respond with a different name, Jim, or whatever variation of that. I have people do this a lot where they have this big professional name, but what you're called by is something else. And what you're doing is putting friction between you and me as we develop a new relationship, right? But if you sit there and say, hey, it's Jim Smith, and I look in and I introduce myself or I reach out to you as Jim. So if you've got one of those names, I don't, right? Neil's Neil, that's all there is to it. But if you're, if your name is Catherine, but you go by Kat, or you have a short name, Thomas is Tommy or Tom or whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever your colleagues in your office is, that's what your name should be on your marketing type material. Those aren't legal documents that you're signing for your house or something. Those are relationships and networking areas. And so the other thing is, what do I call somebody when I see? Well, if their name is James, I'm obviously going to call them James unless I see a quick thing. So an example is I reach out to large firms in particular where they have bios, or if I'm reaching out to a federal, somebody in the federal market and I can see their bios, sometimes the bios are done well enough where you can sit there and it says James Smith. And then down below, Jim's been with us for 5 years heading up this kind of activity. I'm like, ooh, Jim. And so I'm just going to call him Jim. I take that liberty because I'm here to build a relationship. And you can listen to yesterday's tip where I talk about I really don't want to have to build relationships with people who require me to call them Mr. or Mrs. or Doctor, right? Those are the people who are putting friction between our networking relationship, our relationship. Anyway, quick tip for those of you showing up early and on time. It kind of has to do with today's topic too, about how do you wow federal buyers. When you walk in, what do you call them, right? It's one of my favorite things. Actually, just a kind of a bonus tip here is related to today's meeting. When I walk in and I'm meeting with, Dr. blah, 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 the first thing I do is reach out and shake hands or say hi. And I say, hi, I'm Neil. And if they don't say it right away, I say, how do you like to be addressed? And no one is going to say, I like to be addressed as Dr. Smith. Oh, Kat's fine. Jim's fine. John's fine, right? And so that's a way I handle it within the meetings about how do you know whether it's James or John. Okay, so that was just actually a long, quick tip for those of you showing up early and on time. I appreciate it again. Let me get rocking and rolling with today's training. I just got to find my slides to remind myself what I'm talking about. So today we're going to be talking about, obviously, how to wow federal buyers when you have that, especially the first meeting. And this could be for agency or industry folks. But when you meet somebody, how do you wow them in that first meeting? And one of the things I want you to remember is that in order to wow them, you need to take responsibility for the wow in order to gain control over the wow. And I'll talk about this later, but you don't want to just let the wow happen to you or happen to the meeting. You want to sit there and take, if you're not having a meeting that has a wow factor to it, it's your responsibility, not your blame. Don't blame yourself and don't blame others. But if I take responsibility for something not happening or for something I want to happen, if I take responsibility for why I didn't get a wow, then I can look in and improve my process. If I look to my next meeting and I say, I want to have a wow in there and I take responsibility, that means I don't put the responsibility on the other person to make the meeting a wow for them. I put it on me. And I'll talk about how you can do that in today's training. And you want to make sure you're bringing the wow. And I'll tell you how to do this today in the training, but you want to bring the wow to your meeting. You don't want to show up in the meeting and discover the wow or see if it happens, right? Can I get a wow out of this meeting? You want to make sure you're figuring out what is the wow and how do I bring it into the meeting? That's your responsibility. And when I say it's your responsibility, I mean you have the ability to make it happen. And so it's your job to drive that meeting in the way that it's a wow meeting for them and for you, right? You don't want to just be one-sided. You want to make sure both parties in a meeting are finding the wow. You're like, hey, this is a great meeting for me. They're like, hey, this is a great meeting for me. When you do that and you realize you have the control because you took responsibility, then you're going to have more meetings that have a wow factor in it. And I'll describe the wow factor in a second. If that's why you're here and that's what you're excited about, do me a favor. In the chat, just put wow rocks. Wow rocks. You could also just say wow with an exclamation point. Okay, so let's dive into wowing the federal buyer at that first meeting. I'm going to cover down on 3 different sections in today's training. The first thing I just want to start with is, what does wow mean? When I say how to wow federal buyers in your first meeting, what does that mean? The cool thing is this topic came from somebody just like you who was in trainings, and they said, hey, I get into meetings like you tell me, but sometimes I don't feel like they're bringing the wow. That was actually their term. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a meeting about how, or training about how do you bring the wow. But what does the wow mean? I'll start with that. And then I'm going to talk to you about, before you go into a meeting, how can you prepare for the wow? How can you prepare to ensure that you're going to get a wow from the customer? And then I'll wrap up with delivering the wow in that meeting. So again, not waiting for it to happen, but taking control and making it happen and deliver a wow for yourself and for that federal buyer or teaming partner that you might be meeting. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonald. I am the president of the GovCons Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my federal sales training where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years in the federal market as a small business owner, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When you follow that process A to Z, you're going to have repeatable, predictable results. And this is what I want for you. When we talk about how do you have the wow factor, it's not a talent. It's not charisma. It is a skill. It is a process for getting that wow. And as long as you follow the process, you'll have repeatable, predictable wow factors in your meeting. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to subscribe to the Government Contracting Success newsletter. My newsletter puts out just pure government contracting gems, mostly around federal sales, a lot of it around informing you about the federal customers you're trying to sell to. So go ahead and subscribe to that. Join 16,000 plus people in there already, getting a lot of value from it every week. And then the last thing is, I just want to thank the people who registered for today's training. Well over 100 people registered for today's training. And when you do, LinkedIn lets everybody else know that there's good training and good networking here. You're able to grow your network and our community's network by just doing something as simple as registering. That's why I like to say, when you register, it's a very simple thank you to me and to my team who are bringing this training to you. Okay, so let's talk about, what does wow mean? And it was funny, as I was doing this training prep and I'm thinking about the wow factor, it reminded me of Pirates of Caribbean, where they were talking to the pirates about, the rules, and I can't remember the characters' names, but anyways, the guy goes, look, they're more like guidelines than actual rules. And the wow factor is more like than an actual wow, right? The idea of somebody standing up and go, oh my gosh, this is the best meeting ever. I don't actually need that. My version in the government contracting world, in the federal market, we are a lot more close hold with expressing our feelings, right? We don't overly engage in social media, but we'll watch somebody for years and really appreciate it. And so I describe that as the factor. So the wow factor is more like a that's interesting, right? So one of the ways I describe the or wow factor is that when you're in this meeting and you're bringing that wow factor, it is in such a way that they don't look at their watch. They're not looking going, man, when's this meeting going to be over? Maybe I can get some sort of excuse to get out of here. Oh, I spilled my coffee. I got to clean it up. See ya. Right? Instead, it has them focusing on you. People who are in good meetings will forget that the meeting had happened for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever. And that's because you've prepared and you brought that wow factor to them. The second way you can think about them saying, as a wow factor, is that they're thinking about next steps. They're thinking about maybe referring you to somebody else. They're thinking about how they might be able to use you in their office or on their team. They're thinking about how they might pursue this relationship with you. When we meet with somebody, it generally is not a one and done type call, right? It might be with a transactional phone call that's selling me something. But when we're meeting in this federal sales arena, government and industry, we all know we're coming in this trying to decide, do we want to meet again and again and build a long-term relationship, a strategic relationship. And so if you're bringing that wow factor, it means that you've got them thinking about the next step. You can help them see the next step, right? And I'll talk about that in today's training as well, is you can get them thinking about that, but you want them thinking on their own. How might they take this meeting to the next level, helping you and helping their agency? And the last bullet that I had there in black was helps when you have the wow factor and you got them thinking about this, it helps them see your value to their company if you're meeting with an industry partner or to their agency. They see what you're bringing. You don't just come in and say, hey, we do feature, feature, and feature, right? We do this, this, and this. But they're seeing that, oh, I could reduce costs, or I can increase the speed. I was watching this Air Force two-star general who's in charge of Air Force acquisition, et cetera, and he was talking about this need for competing against China isn't about creating bigger and bigger bombs and planes and all this stuff. It's about this ability to deliver value faster and faster. So Silicon Valley does that just naturally because they're in this startup race, but the government is really trying to figure out, how do we move faster? Well, that might be a value that you bring into the agency is, hey, we're going to be able to move faster. And it could be in services like janitorial, right? It clearly can be in the professional and IT services, but it can be in other areas as well. If you help them deliver buildings faster for the Department of Veterans Affairs on medical center campuses, then you're helping bring medical care to veterans faster. Veterans are waiting in line for less time. Sometimes vets have these wait lines that are just horrible, right? And so whatever you're doing and bringing to the government, when you bring the wow factor and when you're thinking about how what you do can help them, they'll be able to see that. They'll see your value. Sometimes people call it a value proposition. Don't overly think that, but just what value are you bringing to somebody? And then the last thing I put here is that when you think about what does wow mean, wow means I got another meeting. That's really all it means. There could be these things I want. I want to get an NDA, or I want to get a strategic plan, or I want to hear about an opportunity, whatever it is. But really, when we meet with somebody, we want a second meeting. I don't know why anybody would meet with a person and not want a second meeting, unless that person, it turns out in the meeting, you're like, oh, it doesn't make sense for us to have a second meeting. That's also totally okay. But it's not okay, in my opinion, to walk into a meeting and not think you're aiming for a second meeting. You're aiming for a continued long-term relationship. And so when you bring that wow factor, it means you got another meeting. And so you want to be thinking about that. So let's talk about how to prepare for the wow. I have a customer who's got a meeting on Thursday who was asking about, how can they go in and have a meeting that really drives to the results that they want. And it comes down to just understanding that first part of his question, right? How can I prepare? So many of us don't prepare, but if you prepare for anything, you will do so much better. And so here I'm giving you tips on how you can prepare to bring that wow factor in. Remember, I said, wow is your responsibility. This is how you take responsibility. These are the things you can do. I also mentioned it's a skill. So this slide is about the skills related to preparing to bring that wow factor. So the first thing to keep in mind is this is where you do research. When I teach sales and people are trying to schedule meetings and get in with the government, I say, don't do a whole lot of research at all before you get a meeting scheduled. But once you get it scheduled, you always want to schedule it 1 to 2 weeks out. 2 weeks is better. It gives you a good amount of time to prepare and relax into that. And that way, if you have other things going on, it doesn't restrict your ability to prepare. But you want to do research. And so if you're looking at a federal agency, and I'll talk about this more in a minute on how to actually prepare. But when you're talking about a federal agency, you can dig into their strategic goals. You can dig into their budget, some of the challenges they face. You can do similar type things with industry partners you're going to meet with, but you're researching them to understand them. Part of bringing the wow, and I'll talk about this in a minute, part of shifting the authority in your favor is having knowledge. And so if you do your research, you'll be able to have a lot more knowledge that'll enhance your conversations in your meetings more than just a capabilities briefing. If you've ever heard that term, in the old days, they used to just teach us go in there and present our deck for a while. I teach that is not what you want to do anymore. You want to go in and for 3 to 5 minutes talk about your company, and then for the rest of the time it's a discussion. And so when you research, you'll be able to be prepared to have that discussion. So the second bullet is use an icebreaker, and these next 4 bullets are all related to my call plan. I've taught many sessions on using a call plan, so you can go into the previous training and watch this. But when you use a call plan, it's basically preparing on paper what you want to discuss and say with the person you're meeting. And so an icebreaker is this way to go into a sales meeting, because all of these are sales meetings, and not talk about Disney World, or not talk about golfing or some current sports championship, not talk about fishing, not look at the back of their desk and go, oh, I see that, let me just talk about it. That's old, like decades old school style. Even back when I was learning it, I didn't like it because it took you away from what you were doing. And it actually added kind of a level of disingenuousness where they taught us salespeople to pretend like we're interested in all these things. We're not. We're interested in having a sales call and seeing if we can move the sale forward. And so when I teach an icebreaker, what I say is make sure the icebreaker is related to somebody. If you're going to meet somebody in the federal government, there's a really good chance you can find them listed in one of the government's documents. Maybe they did a podcast. I just mentioned this acquisition, this Air Force officer who did an acquisition session, and he was on stage. Well, I can say that when I go in. It's like, I've been looking forward to meeting you since I watched you on stage doing that talk about China and America or whatever, or I listened to you on a podcast, or I read that article you wrote. Sometimes you have to dig for them. One time I said to a person I met, and this was a small business professional that I was meeting, but I said, oh, I read that document you wrote about the value of small businesses to the federal market and government in general. And I really appreciated seeing how long you have been an advocate. And she has been in career for like 20 years in the government. She's like, what? That was my college thesis document. And I had just found it on the internet, because everything's on the internet. And I got it. And it was like, that's perfect. And it instantly put us in a different position than if I had said, oh, you got 2 kids, I got 2 kids, or you're bowling and I'm bowling, or whatever, right? And the reason it instantly put us in a good position is because from there, I transitioned it right to, well, you were really enthusiastic about small businesses back then. 10 years later, 20 years later, do you still feel as powerfully about that? And it put her in this position of talking about how great small businesses are to assisting governments accomplish their mission. So having an icebreaker is part of that research. The next thing is you want to have an objective. In case you're listening to this, the next bullet is determine your purpose. And so when I'm preparing a call plan, I teach people, and I want you to pay attention to this, is that you want to have a purpose that is a shared purpose with the other person you're meeting with, and an objective. An objective is something you want to get out of this meeting. So an example with Booz Allen, if I'm going to go to a company like Booz Allen, try to have a first meeting, really my objective in that meeting, in addition to a second meeting, is an NDA. If I can get somebody in Booz Allen or a company of that size to complete an NDA, then that is a paper proof of our commitment to have at least more discussions, right? So to put it in perspective, when you think about a company like Booz Allen or these larger companies, for them to put an NDA in place, a non-disclosure agreement, it means they have to go back to their bosses or go back to legal and some of these other people. And that means they're investing their time in written activity and sending emails back and forth. This is how I can know whether the conversation is just soft or whether they're serious about trying to figure out whether we can work together. That's why I call it an objective. Inside of each meeting you should have one major objective, and a secondary objective is allowed, but one major objective. This is what I want to get out of this. And so when you go in, that could be anything, just as long as it moves the sale forward. It could be an agreement to meet again, right? And ideally, you schedule it right then and there. It could be an agreement to get introduced to somebody. It could be an agreement that in the federal space that they're going to go find a document and get it back to you. Whatever it is, it needs to be something where you say to yourself, my objective in this meeting is this, because if I get this, it'll move the sale forward. The purpose is a little different. The purpose is when I share it with the other person, I say, look, the purpose of this meeting from my perspective is that we're going to, introduce ourselves and get to know each other and see if there might be room for us to work together going forward. Right. And so I'm stating a purpose, and I'm not teaching you how to have the meeting today. But when I do that, I ask them, how does that sound? And when I do that, I get what we in the sales world call it first yes, right? You're trying to get people to just say yes to the smallest things. And in sales, we're saying basically they're on track to move forward. Does that make sense? If it does, in the chat, put yes. Okay, so you have an objective, you have a purpose. And then the last thing, the bulk of how to have a wow factor in your meetings is you write spin questions. Spin questions are sales questions, and it comes from a sales methodology. I have learned tons of them, but it's my favorite. And it's called spin sales, right? And so spin stands for the type of questions you would ask. Situation questions, problem questions, implication questions, and needs payoff questions. Depending on what you're doing in the meeting that you're going to have, you want to be asking these type of questions. Usually the questions you want to ask are problem questions and implication questions. Very quickly, when you think about spin, situational questions, that S, those are factual questions. I might want to be asking about, well, how many users do you have? How many servers do you have? How big is your floor if I'm going to replace the flooring? Those kind of things. Those are factual questions. And the reason we try to minimize the questions we're asking around the situation is that we should be able to find them somewhere else. It's kind of a waste of their time, especially if they know that I can find that out. If I sit there and say, well, who's the small business professional? You better have looked on the website to make sure that you couldn't find it, because then I will ask a question like, hey, I looked online, especially on your website. I couldn't find the small business professional. Who is the small business professional that works with you, Mr. or Mrs. Contracting Officer, right? And so that's an okay way to ask situation questions. P are the problem questions, and this is the value of any meeting you have. You're trying to uncover what's the problem they're running into. The idea is those questions, those problem questions, should align to your solutions. So if I have the ability through process improvement to automate or to take spreadsheets, right, and to move them into Microsoft SharePoint, I might ask a situation question. I wasn't able to see this, but do you guys use SharePoint? I think most agencies do. Oh yeah, we do over here. And do you use SharePoint, or do you have Excel-based solutions? And these are where I can find out they're doing their job with Excel. Well, I might sit there and talk about some of the problems around using Excel instead of using something like SharePoint, which is an actual enterprise platform that is very protected, run under governance, et cetera. Implication questions, really quickly, just to line it up, and you can watch, I do a ton of training that you can find in the past replays on spin selling even. But if a problem question is asking an IT department about their servers going down and what's the problem with that, it's like, it's costly to us, and we have to work overtime and people are yelling at us. Let's go to the implication question. Who's yelling at you? Well, the HR department, the finance department, this department, because now they can't get access to their applications and do their jobs because of these servers that are going down. So the problem is servers are going down. The implication is HR is no longer able to properly hire people or bring them on or process complaints or whatever they do. And so whatever you sell, you want to understand what problem are you solving and what are the broader implications that are in there. So when you think about a call plan and you think about preparing for the wow, you just want to have these main things in there: the objective, the purpose, and the spin questions. When you do, you'll be able to pull the wow out. Okay, so before I talk about delivering the wow, speaking of wow, I just want to share exciting news. We're very excited about a new tool set we're bringing. Actually, I think I'm going to change this box to a toolbox based on a lot of people's recommendations. But we're rolling out a web-based solution that is basically a toolbox, right? Designed to solve the top challenges that small business government contractors have. I've been a contractor, I understand this, and I've talked to tens of thousands of small businesses in the last 6 years. And the top three problems that I find over and over is getting in the door to meet with federal buyers, kind of what we're talking about today, finding teammates who want to work with you, and then identifying, pursuing, and responding to opportunities that you can win. So if that's something you're interested in, you want to hear more about it when we release it, join our waitlist at govconinabox.com, www.govconinAbox.com. If you're already in there, just put GovCon Rocks in the chat. Okay, so let me take the last few minutes and talk about how to deliver the wow in a meeting. I talked about how to prepare it, etc. One of the things I want you to remember is that when you go into a meeting, don't let the meeting happen. Make it happen. And what I mean by that is like the call plan, for example. If you have a call plan, you already know how you want that meeting to happen. I'm going to ask these questions. I'm going to go this direction. You don't want to walk in and just let the other person steamroll you. You want to be able to practice your skills at saying, hey, this is what I would like to talk about. I personally like to sit there and just hold up my call plan. You find that first second when somebody says, for example, how are you? Don't go too far into how are you. And just find that spot to be able to go, hey, do you mind if I just quickly make sure we're on the same page for the purpose of today's meeting and what I was hoping to get out of it? And they're going to say, yeah, sure, of course. And then you share your purpose, and you can even share, and this is one of my favorite things, is to hold up my call plan and go, or point down and go, hey, I actually prepared a call plan. So like an agenda for today's meetings with some questions I want to ask. If I'm looking down, that's why I'm just marking off the 7 questions I have written down or the 10 questions I have. It instantly puts the other person together with you to complete that call plan. 99% of the time, they're going to say, that all sounds great. Let's do it. The second thing about delivering the wow in a meeting, right? You're bringing that call plan in, so it's going to help. But you want to shift the authority in your favor. Like here, I put like Gus did at DLA. If you don't know Gus Phelps, he's in our chat for sure. And he's my colleague here at the GovCon Chamber. And when he and I met in our first 90 days of working together, I was guiding and working with him on going into DLA. Long story short, since I'm running out of time, because he did his research, he had found this 175-page document that was really useful to us. It told us about different offices, like really down low, that we wanted to get into. And so when he went into a meeting and was talking to, I think this was small business specialist and a contracting officer, he started mentioning this document and saying, can I ask a question about this? And the authority instantly shifted when the person said, well, what is that document you have? And he said, oh, it's this. And they didn't even have it. It was their own document, their organization, but that person did not have it. They hadn't seen it before. Gus, do you mind sharing that with me? No, absolutely. And so here was Gus, brand new into an agency, and he was able to shift the authority just by showing this other person that I have done my homework. I respect you, and I have done my homework, and I know what I want to talk to you about, and that other person got it. There's a lot of things you can do like that when you research and you're asking well-researched questions. You will begin to shift the authority in your favor. It doesn't mean you're the boss or anything like that. It just means the other person's kind of letting you guide it. When I get into a car, if I'm not in the driver's seat, I have shifted authority so that the other person's authority. They're determining everything pretty much, even where we're going, even if we agreed we were going somewhere else. All right, the last thing I wanted to mention here about delivering wow in the meeting is ask this vital question that I like asking. When I share the purpose of the meeting, it's like, hey, John, can I just share the purpose of the meeting and make sure that it aligns with you and then see if you've got anything? And John says, yes, and I share it. And when John says, that all sounds good to me, I say, John, really quick though, before we begin, I know what will make this meeting valuable to me, but what would make this meeting valuable or a good use of your time coming out? Is there any particular thing that would make it more valuable than not? And you just stop talking and let them say something. Let them think about that for a second. Even if they don't, they say something really specific and they just say, no, I was just really looking for that introduction today. Like, okay, sounds good. At the end, maybe we decide about going into a second meeting. But when you ask a question like this, it's making them think about the longer term perspective. Here's what I want you to remember from today's training. First off, the wow factor doesn't just happen. You don't show up at a meeting and hope it's there. You bring the wow factor through your preparation, et cetera. So you bring the wow to any meeting you come into. I bring the wow to this training. The second thing is use a call plan. When you use a call plan, that wow, that is going to happen for you. You're going to get out of the meeting what you want. And sometimes what you want is not a yes. What you want is a decision. If the decision's no or yes, that's fine. What you don't want is just to get the runaround, right? And so if you use a call plan, that meeting will go in the direction you want. You'll get what you want out of the meeting. And the last thing is, remember, as you're in the meeting, do the research ahead of time so that you can shift authority to you. One of the other ways you can shift authority is, like I said at the beginning of the meeting, mention that you have a call plan and that you're going to be following it. The other person's going to go, man, I'm just winging this meeting. Like I just came in, you're prepared, you take the driver's seat. They'll be happy to let the authorities shift in your favor as long as it's overall good for them. And that's part of your process is you're making sure it's good for both of you. They'll be totally fine. Hey, so hope you value the training. If you did, put GovCon rocks in the chat. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter because that's where I'm putting out a ton of information in addition to other places. Register for tomorrow's training. Tomorrow's training is about 10 acronyms that every GovCon should know. There'll be some that you obviously know, but there are others in there that are just good ones that I want you to know a little bit more about. I will see you in tomorrow's training because it's 12:30 and I'm out of here on time.